Well, good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Tom Still from the Wisconsin Technology Council, and thank you for joining us this morning for what I think is going to be a very interesting and important webinar about Wisconsin's efforts to jumpstart a venture capital fund of funds. And here on this lead slide, you can see our participants, and I'm going to tell you a little more about each one of them and kind of alpha order here in a second. But Jason Fields, Mike Kublet, Sam Rickers, and Karen Renee, and I think they represent all kind of different perspectives around this particular issue. So next slide, please. So Jason first. Jason is identified by the really dapper look here with the pink bow tie and carnation, and this is him. I mean, this is how he's just kind of a Renaissance man, and so this is what you get when you get Jason Fields. He's president and CEO right now of MadRep, which is the regional economic development partnership. He's got a rich background in financial services, as you can see here. He's founded Dark Knight Capital Ventures, which is a venture fund, and they specialize in some investments in a couple of sectors. And he's been an author, and he's on a radio station. So, like I said, kind of a Renaissance man. So, welcome, Jason. Mike Kuglich. Mike is here as well. Mike is a state representative from New Berlin in the area there and kind of southeast Wisconsin. Small businessman, really rich background around that. He's been a part of the Wisconsin Restaurant Association, the New Berlin Chamber of Commerce. First elected to the assembly in 2010, and I think was recognized as a leader right away. I mean, he was started chairing committees almost out of the gun there. He was the leading Republican sponsor of Act 41, which passed in 2013, and it led to the creation of the Badger Fund of Funds. And he's also co-chair of the Tech Caucus, which the Tech Council has helped to establish. It's an informal group. So welcome, Mike. Sam Rickers. Sam is the Deputy Secretary and Chief Operating Officer for WDC, the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. A lot of background around rural development in particular. And he did so at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. He was a White House advisor. He did some similar work when he was at Georgetown. He's a native of Stoughton, so just down the road. And you can see he's got degrees from law school at Wisconsin, Columbia, and McAllister. And just welcome, Sam. And thanks for. I think you're a good example of someone who's been through the crucible for the last year or so on the COVID-19 issue, and a part of the leadership at WDC that's been trying to think the way through it about what kind of initiatives there are. Karen Renee. Karen is president of eCourt Reporters, which she started, and she's also got her other firm, Milwaukee Court Reporters. And after launching eCourt, which is now, I think you said, Karen, in 49 states, so that's great reach already. Her use of technology around the legal industry and how to make that more efficient has been well recognized. So thank you, Karen, for being with us today. So I'm just going to very quickly give an overview here, and then I want to turn to Sam because this proposal is part of the governor's budget proposal, which would cover the fiscal year starting in July 1st of 2021 and then running through June 30th of 2023. So it's a 2-year budget. It would be a $100 million state investment in a larger fund of funds. It require $200 million in private match over time. Not an uncommon way to do this. This is in fact, it's been kind of tested through the Badger Fund of Funds as well. There would be an oversight board at WDC. And it would generally build on the momentum that we already have in the angel and venture ecosystem. The investor tax credits in Wisconsin have worked extremely well since 2005. The Badger Fund of Funds, which I mentioned, and more private funds all the time. For example, just in the last week or so, we've had announcements from HealthX Ventures and Gateway Ventures about new funds that they've raised. So there's activity in this sector that is very welcome. And this again, it's not an entirely new idea, but hey, it's okay to borrow stuff from elsewhere, right? It's similar to the fund of funds in Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois. Some important differences, but at the same time, the whole notion of leveraging state dollars with private investments from within and outside those states while attracting more assets under management, which is something Wisconsin really needs to do. So, with that, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to hear from everybody for a few minutes, and then I will welcome your questions on chat. Shoot those to me. I would encourage you up front here. If you after the end of this and you see that this is something you think is good, write your legislators. Let them know that this is where that you think this is a valuable piece. Also, on our website, wisconsin-technology-council.com, you can find FAQs on this. We're excited to have kind of boiled that down for you. It was part of our white papers as well, so that's all there. So, Sam, thank you for joining, and tell us a little bit why and how this found its way into the governor's proposal, and why, from the WDC point of view, you think it's important.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Thanks. Nice to be here with everybody. First, I guess it's a long time coming. This is far from a newfangled idea, and it's something that we're excited to really lead the charge on trying to get this done. Just as a way of context, and Tom mentioned a little bit of this, but we know in Wisconsin, and folks on this call certainly know, that we have been trailing our neighbors, not for a year or two, but over the last decade, certainly. Just the figures, we trail Minnesota over the last 10 years from 2010 to 2019 by $8 billion in the venture we're able to attract and invest here. Michigan, $4 billion. We are leaving and have been leaving money on the table. We have, in my belief, and certainly Secretary Hughes and the governor's belief, as good, if not better, businesses, as good, if not better, universities to attract those dollars, to invest those money. So let's bring it here. When we started, as Tom, you mentioned, it has been a really taxing, busy year as we're taking and dealing with the impact of the pandemic. One of the things we want to do is not just return to where we were in March 2019, March 2020 rather. We want to return to well beyond that, right? So we're in a place that we come out of this pandemic much stronger than when we went into it. And so not drawing up some newfangled idea, but really looking at where we are, where we can compete better, looking at an idea that we know that the Tech Council has championed this idea since 2012, growing on the lessons we've learned from really successful Badger Fund of Funds, looking at, as you mentioned, Tom, our neighboring states that have all said, we need to invest public dollars, not to sustain venture investment, but to really spark it and draw a lot of attention to it. You mentioned, Tom, in 2017, I went and had a stint at Georgetown University Business School. The whole idea was to attract investors from the coast by hosting pitch events and things at some of our flyover zone universities. We held pitch events in Des Moines. We were partnering with Iowa State at the time, partnered with Mississippi State and Purdue. And certainly those are all good things we need to be doing. Maybe doing those in Wisconsin, but I don't know of a better way that we can draw a magnet to all of the incredible investment opportunities we have in Wisconsin, to the capital that seems locked on the coast and has been for too long. Again, why the public support at this point? It's certainly, as you mentioned, it is because it can start it up. We know that it's been a tried and true evidence, and it's not something that is a sustained support as proposed by the governor or in the governor's budget. It is a one-time investment to create an evergreen fund. And so we really think it moves us into and beyond the pandemic and into a 21st century economy and beyond. The goals are super simple. We want to keep businesses growing here. We want to keep them investing here and creating jobs here. At WDC, we have had, the programs you mentioned, whether it's our QMVB tax credits, whether it's the support we give to the universities to really get ideas started through our SBIR grants or things like that. It gets a bunch of ideas started here,
Hmm.
But then all too often, we see those businesses that start after they start up. Then when they're looking to grow, they're leaving Wisconsin because they're going to where their capital is coming from. And so if we can reverse that trend, make a dent in that trend, that is at the simplest and best goal as we can frame it as.
Yeah.
We want to build that magnet so that that buzz of Wisconsin, that it's a place that dollars should flow and can flow, and that investors will get a return, a strong return on their investments through Wisconsin companies.
Yeah.
I guess I just leave it here. I know at this point in time, the governor has proposed his budget. It will go through the process as we always do in the 2-year cycle of our budget. Our goal at this point is to really keep things simple. We know that as simple as this tool can come out of this sausage making process is, the better it will be for Wisconsin businesses. It'll be easier to administer. To date, after the release of the governor's budget, we have even beforehand, but have really had and will continue to have conversations, obviously, with really smart people with their perspectives, whether that's you, Tom, Jason Fields, and Corey Nettles. Missy and I were on a call weeks ago. We have great board members, whether it's folks like Joe Kurgis and Generator and their perspective. Ken Johnson has become certainly a friend, but also a mentor in some ways to really help me kind of give the history of where Badger Fund of Funds has been. And we will continue to have those open dialogue, that open dialogue with folks across Wisconsin for their perspectives as we work to build this. In the end, however, the design of the provided, and hopefully that the governor and the legislature reach that point of compromise, that we launch this fund with the support and advocacy, I hope, of many of the folks on this call. We will absolutely engage in professional support and help folks that have helped other states build funds to keep its administration as simple as possible, as easy as possible, to really harness dollars in and out of Wisconsin to build this ecosystem.
Excellent. So Sam, I mean, one thing, I mean, this is a billboard for Wisconsin, a potential billboard around, I mean, around the country showing what we've got, all the different assets you talked about. A few more details. It's, with any fund, the investment is going to be metered out. It's not like all $100 million goes out right away, because the different recipient funds for this would only draw on it as they go along. And there's a maximum of 25 million in any one recipient fund.
That's right. Yep.
And I suspect that means it'd be, well, obviously the math says at least 4, but probably more recipient funds that could be funded out of this, assuming they can provide the match.
We suspect there'll be likely more than 4, but I think we wanted to make sure that there was at least a $25 million match if a fund came in at that level. Other kind of details of that, you mentioned the 2-to-1 match that we would expect from that portfolio. We know, and I've had a chance to talk with diverse investors and women-owned investors, and know that the likelihood that investments made by folks that are diverse or that are women, they're more likely to invest in minority-owned and women-owned businesses. And so, there are a lot of priorities in this proposal, but again, going back to the kind of the chief goal and what our hope is to really get that goal across the finish line is to obviously bring in that capital that keeps our entrepreneurs growing, and to make sure that we can do so as simply as possible. Because if the fund, as it emerges, as I mentioned, from that sausage making process, is full of complication, full of regulation, I think it will really hinder our ability to move swiftly. One of the upsides of it that administering it at WDC with our quasi-public structure, it certainly has the oversight of our board. The governor's proposal directs us to in addition to that, create a separate oversight board to really make sure that we're doing it well. So I think if we can keep it simple, we can really achieve great success through it.
Yeah, well, very good. Well, I'm going to save our current sausage maker, Mike Kublet, for last, but I want to turn now to a former sausage maker in Jason Fields. who, as I noted, is the CEO of MadRep and an investor himself and a former legislator. He's seen the process, he's seen the need for this, and he's been involved in a couple of things. So Jason, let's get you up on screen. And I just want to talk a little bit about your perceptions on this. As an investor, how do you characterize the need for this?
Tom, one, thank you. Looks like if you can't see my face, I'm trying so you all can see me talk. Here we go.
There you go.
One, I think it's a great idea. I think Sam hits the nail right on the head when you look at in all the roles that I've played, and particularly coming into the role in the 8-county region here in Madison, Dane, South Iowa, all these counties that we now represent. For me, and Tom, you mentioned it, it was what are we doing to attract that talent?
Mm-hmm.
More importantly, what are we doing to not lose talent? The reason why I say it's important, imperative, and many of you who know me on this know that a lot of times for me, it's not necessarily just about the capital. It is about the opportunities to create role models, philanthropists in communities, because out of these kinds of initiatives come an empowerment thing where people like a Dana Guthrie, who's a dear friend, I see her on. Dana just raised $6.25 million in her first 4 months.
Right.
I see my friend Michael Harper on with Dan Einhorn and their firm.
Mm-hmm.
When you, and Q Elamine, I see him on. When you have access to opportunities or access to capital for people like this in this space, in this industry, it's an opportunity for us to build up communities. It's an opportunity for us to get over the myth or the stereotype that emerging diverse fund managers, asset managers, that they don't perform well. And then out of this, what comes, or what you should see, is a more fully equipped ecosystem, a fair ecosystem that addresses technology, real estate. My friend William Martin, who created the first Opportunity Zone Fund, African-American man. When you see these opportunities, and that's what these are, I want to make sure I'm very clear on this, Tom. We're not advocating for a handout. What we're advocating is for the opportunity to prove that we have funds that can generate alpha, generate a high return, as well as anybody else. The additional items that come with that is you have a person like Dana, Mike, and Will, Corey Nettles, and myself, who will look at people, entrepreneurs, women, people of color, indigenous people, service disabled veterans, and really help empower and lift our community, because we all know that the startup community is a very important community. And a lot of times having access to these kinds of funds, Tom, it's a question of, and I was talking about this with my good friend, Zach Brandon at the Chamber. Many of us know the pitch to the guy from Stanford or Harvard. But what's the pitch, Tom, to the African-American man who created the Super Soaker to come to the Madison region and build his empire? Now he's launching a company that specializes in batteries. There's a young African-American woman who is Life Biosciences. What I'm doing when I see opportunities like this, Tom, I'm going to those same people in my network across the country. And now it's an attraction thing. It's an attraction thing to say, would you be willing to come to Wisconsin, start your business if we have the capital in bioscience, ag tech, fintech, people of color, women? Would you be willing to come to a Madison and Milwaukee and really contribute to making our region competitive? Those are the kinds of things that I point to, that I look to when I see these kinds of opportunities. And let me say this before I close. Having worked with Representative Kublet, you've all heard me call him brother when we were on.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say I'm happy that he's running point on the other side of the aisle, because Mike and I've worked together, and he's an individual that understands this, and a no-nonsense kind of guy, and let's get it done. And so I think for all of us, and particularly in this role, it's just one more feather in our cap to be innovative, to be attractive, and more importantly, to hopefully retain talent that potentially would leave. And let me close on this story, why that's important. I have some friends who started businesses, both African-American men, one Latino man, in Milwaukee. Couldn't get necessarily investors, couldn't get the access to the capital, didn't have the network for opportunities. Both of these gentlemen, Tom and everybody else listening, moved to San Diego, went to the coast, thriving now, thriving. What's and the problem that creates for us is, number one, we lose talent. We lose role models. We lose people who are creating jobs. And so if we want to be competitive, innovative, we have to, as Sam said, stop leaving money on the table and put us in a position where we can leverage the talent that we have that a lot of times may be overlooked when you don't have certain people in the room. And so that's why these kinds of things are important.
Yeah, very much so. You know, from the state point of view, this is an investment in two different ways. It's an investment that can return on investment because
That's right.
Treated just like any other investor in the fund, you know, in terms of return on investment directly, but also indirectly on the talent side, the economic development side, the tax generation side. So let me turn to Karen Renee now on this, and we're going to get back to you, to Jason, about, you know, because of your MAD rep role, I mean, you're representing other counties as well. So there's a rural perspective on this where we're seeing a lot of activity. Karen, tell us a little bit about eCourt reporters. Karen Renee is from Burlington in Southeast Wisconsin, and she is she started a couple of firms, including kind of a direct traditional court reporting firm, but also now eCourt reporter. So Karen, give us 30 seconds on the firm and what you're up to.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Jason and Sam, both that have covered some areas that are near and dear to my heart in the entrepreneurial world. So I'll just start by saying thanks for having us on and getting a perspective from the entrepreneurship side. Being in the entrepreneurship community, I have seen many businesses here in Wisconsin that has tremendous talent. And to dovetail a little bit on what Jason said, even our business, eCourt Reporters, has been reached out. People have reached out to us from investors from the coast, wanting us to look at them or them to look at us. And while we don't want to leave money left on the table, what perspective that comes from us is we don't want to go to the coast, right? We want to stay here in Wisconsin. There's a great work ethic here. There's hardworking people here. Our business is based on those ethics and on that hardworking talent. We want to grow here. We want to bring our staff and employees. We want them from the Midwest. So that those investors that ask us to look at them as coming into our business, we shy away a little bit, just in the sense of we really want to stay right here. So something like the Fund of Funds would mean a world of difference for entrepreneurs like myself and many others in the community. You know, we have an exhaustive list of staff and employee that we want to bring on, and we want to bring them on right here in Wisconsin. Yeah, my business partner is a woman also, and Judy and I, actually, we ride our own Harley Davidsons, and our mantra is, our business is like how we ride our motorcycles, which there is no reverse. And that mantra actually resonates here in Wisconsin. It's exactly the kind of talent we want to bring into our company, keep in our company. And again, both Sam and Jason touched on why it's important to have it right here in Wisconsin. So thanks for taking the time to listen to me a little bit about the entrepreneurship side. I'd be happy to answer questions from my perspective, but essentially, we're real pleased to have this coming into Wisconsin.
Yeah, this is good. And let me add a little color on something Karen alluded to. Investors like to keep their investments close. And it's why having more assets under management in Wisconsin is such a big deal. Investors, I don't want to say lazy, they just would prefer have, you know, all of their investments within one air flight or an hour's drive or whatever it may be. And so that's the truth of whether they're in the coast or here. And so the more investors who are actually domiciled here, who have assets under management in Wisconsin, the better it is for Wisconsin companies, because they don't tend to want to pull them out and take them somewhere else. So, and Karen, how much have you raised and how much do you hope to raise?
Yeah, so we are raising 500,000 and we have raised a little over 100,000 to date. And we continue to grow the community, the support that we get from the Wisconsin Technology Council, the support from the governor's business plan, all of those have really made connections for us to start that process of gaining investments. So we appreciate that. And yeah, our goal is to continue to grow and bring on more staff. We really have a lot of we have a lot of work and we need those employees and we really want to bring them in from Wisconsin. So
Good. All right. Well, keep that Harley going forward, right? So very good.
thanks.
Well, hang with us, Karen. I'm sure there will be some questions. Let me turn now to Representative Mike Kublet. Mike is really one of the more knowledgeable people in the legislature around, I think, just tech issues in general, but also on what's happening in the investment world. As I noted earlier, he was the lead Republican sponsor on the Badger Fund of Funds not that long ago. And so Mike, I want to call on you now just for some perspectives and maybe a little bit about process. Not everybody would know exactly how the process works. The governor proposed a budget. It now goes to the legislature. The first stop is the Joint Finance Committee, but take it from there and tell us what you see on that process side of things.
Oh boy! Well, before I get into process, I just want to thank my brother Jason Fields for the kind words. All right, Jason and I teamed up on a number of bills together and passed them both with Republican governor and Democrat governor. Jason and I just try to do what's right for the state of Wisconsin and try not to get in the partisan side. And again, Tom Stills, you were very instrumental in helping me when I was a new legislator in getting involved in the whole ecosystem of startups and venture capital. Mm-hmm. And you were very instrumental in getting the Badger Fund of Funds off the ground. So thank you for that. So we want to kind of talk about process and just kind of where I'm at. One of the things as a legislator is if you do your due diligence, the devil's in the details, right? And when you just look at a one-page, document in the state budget, it brings up questions. And I think that's what we have to do. And Sam, I want to reach out and we should get together and have some in-depth conversations because the facts are this, and I think Jason described me as no nonsense, pretty much straight shooter. So, the facts are is we have divided government, right? So unless this is vetted, I'm just going to be totally honest, the chances of this thing passing in the budget is probably not great. Now, do I think it could pass as a single bill? Yes, as long as, there's the vetting process. Now, I'm not saying it wouldn't pass in the budget. I'm just saying when you look at reality in divided government, and I think some of the things that we just have to look at that I think are obvious is, are we reinventing the wheel? We already have the Badger Fund of Funds. Do we not just allocate more dollars to that? Now, I don't claim to be the smartest guy on this panel, so someone have to explain to me why we would need to do that, and there's probably a good reason. But just from the obvious, I think that would probably be a question. And I think the other question is, how did we come up with 100 million? But I think from the concept wise, I've always been a supporter of venture capital. Jason did a great job, and Sam, of talking about the importance of it. I think we've just scratched the surface with the Badger Fund of Funds, creating the ecosystem. It's important. I remember this, Tom, 8 years ago when we were talking about it, is that you have to create that ecosystem because you've got emerging, technologies, emerging companies, and they have to have access to capital. And I think one of the things that Jason mentioned is that not only do we lose companies, we lose talent, but we lose workers, right? We lose tax base. So it's something that's very important. And when you look at coming out of the pandemic, jobs, right? That's very important. Here's something that I still remember from 8 years ago, Tom, that you instilled in me, is that all net new jobs come from companies that are 3 or 4 years of age, right?
Mhm.
So if you're looking at job growth, and that to me, I think different people have different objectives when you look at this. To me, return, I know to the fund managers is very important, but to me is creating an avenue that we can create new companies, emerging technologies, grow businesses, grow jobs. And a lot of these jobs, they're professions, right? They're high paying, professional positions. And then as we do that, we create, we grow our tax bases. So it's a win-win. So from that concept, I think that there's a runway to get it done. Right now, I don't know which way that would be best, but I think Sam and I and you and some others interested, we should get around a table and just really, hash out some of these things, because it's hard in one page. I think our bill was 60 some pages. I don't know, it might have been more. But I also understand that what Sam said too is you can't get it loaded with bureaucratic red tape either, right? You need to be nimble, you need to be flexible, so that's important. So I guess what I would just say is we have some other individuals now in our caucus that I would invite to be part of this as well. You're familiar with Shannon Zimmerman. I spoke to him briefly. I mean, he comes from this world, sharp dude. And I think we can get this done, but I think, we need to get, like I said, devils in the details. We kind of need to know. The one concerning thing was continuing appropriations. It says one-time investment, then it says continuing appropriations. So to me, that's just a mixed message. And what funds do we use? I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of available funds soon. So, I think there's a way we can get this done, but I think it's just going to need collaboration from both sides. And Tom, you remember, we had both sides of the aisle sitting in rooms figuring this thing out. So I think we can get it done.
Oh, yeah. Well, that vote on the Badger Fund, and again, thanks to your leadership, was 91-2 in your House and 29-3 in the Senate. So, I mean, it was clearly very bipartisan and almost unanimous. Let's have a little conversation here around some things that Mike brought up, because these are vital. First of all, your notion about, jobs is, at the end of the day, jobs and economic development, that's what matters, right? And so these venture-backed firms over time, they're buying stuff in the rest of the economy. They're hiring people in the economy. They have a supply chain that usually stretches around the state. I think we'll be able to cite some good examples of that. And let me turn to Sam on this specifically. Why the $100 million? I think I know why that figure. I think I know the answer, but Sam, why don't you take a shot at that?
Well, I guess I'll start just by saying that, and this is Representative Kublet, I also refer to some of the cheat sheets that the Wisconsin Tech Council puts out for Q&A. But if you look at the demand and the pipeline right now in Wisconsin, for that, just in the Wisconsin Tech Council's assessment in a survey of firms that are out there, the demand certainly is there to capture that and more. As we look at the investments of other states, it certainly doesn't, this isn't a exaggerated investment as we measure what the plan is here relative to what other states that we're competing with are also doing. I just want to, there's something that I think that you said is important, and number one, sitting down with you and other really smart people with the legislature, figuring this out sooner than later, I think that makes a ton of sense. I also don't see this as at all in competition with or adverse to the goals and the current operation of the Badger Fund of Funds. I think the Badger Fund of Funds has been such a success for Wisconsin.
Mhm.
I just saw Jonathan Horn's name pop up as we're talking here, and I've had a chance to meet all of the fund managers there, and certainly the Badger Fund of Funds and all of them would be eligible investment funds to apply to this fund of funds. And so it would, rather than being competition for the Badger Fund of Funds, would actually, in the way I see it, be an outgrowth of it and really fund the next phase of the Badger Fund of Fund companies as well as others in the state.
And to elaborate, I would say that's correct. Because Badger Fund of Funds has been average investments of maybe 500,000 per company, somewhere in there. I think this one might help take some of those already successful companies to the next level. So that's one reason for that dollar amount. Plus, it's a magnet for money that's elsewhere, in this state, but beyond, and especially as we look at especially some of our neighbors, which have had some pretty good success. Karen or Jason, on the questions that Representative Kublet brought up.
I think I'll take a stab at it. I think Mike is correct a lot. I mean, I think there is how I interpret that, and I think you guys need to understand from legislative point of view.
Right.
What I hear when Mike says these is there's room, there's a pathway, but there's still some things we need to figure out. And so when I'm interpreting, and I think Tom, Sam, and Mike and I, because we've all done this, we've done this before. So the rest of you should know that, one, I don't think we all disagree. How we get there, like Mike said, is the devil's in the details. And so I think that starts with this conversation, sitting down and making sure that, one, I mean, it has to pass in a bipartisanship. So a lot of that will have to be education. I think Mike and Tom can tell you all that, particularly when it comes to legislators, and I see I call the Jason Fields 2.0 version, Representative Dora Drake, who replaced me, much better looking, way smarter. I think a lot of legislators may not understand the process and understand this. So it starts there, getting the right legislators in the room. And Mike is correct. Shannon is a freaking wizard in this stuff. Sitting down with you all and seeing how do we get there. And that may take a moment or so, because there are some things that we have to address that's palatable for everybody. And so, we're at the starting point. I think this conversation is great, but more education, how we get there and why it's important. Those are the things that I think, as Mike put it, still have to be ironed out. Good concept, great idea. Now this is the moment where, again, I think Mike, Tom, and Sam, and we listen to what Karen has to say. We take all those things into consideration and then figure out what do we need to do to make this happen. I would like to say that I think it's important. I really want it to happen because I see Nadia Johnson on here who's launching a fund, again, for people like me who now in this area of MadRep, my area of focus is not just urban, but it's rural as well. And when I look at the problems that rural areas have been having with growth, can this be a vehicle or a tool to help attract businesses in those rural areas? This is one tool that I would use to make sure that, quite honestly, our rural brothers and sisters are being helped, and that we're targeting some development in those areas. And so, as a lot of people come in different angles, the proof is really, where do we all come together and how can we make it palatable for everybody? Mm-hmm. We're beginning stages. This is a long ball game, but I think this is a great conversation to have. We just have to remember why, and when Mike and Sam are talking and Tom are talking, start looking at those items that we need to address to move us past the needle and get it done. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as Sam Ricker said at the beginning, there's some sausage making involved, right?
Yeah.
But the devil's truly is in the details, and at the same time, you want to have a bill or some structure that emerges not so overly detailed that the hands of fund managers themselves are tied, which is not good. Are there lessons to be learned from some of the other states? Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan's had an approach too. Theirs has been like more privately, almost exclusively managed, but that's because the state was broke at the time. But anything that you see in other states that strike your eye, Sam? Anything there?
You know, Indiana's Next Level Fund. We've looked at that a fair amount, and I think what you're seeing there, they are. We've seen them really invest with some really experienced money managers.
Yep.
And so I think the lesson there is, and you spoke is by creating a fund that really helps build that ecosystem and that sophistication within Wisconsin. I think that's just tremendous for our state. The Badger Fund of Funds has been a great step in doing that. And so I think looking at some states like Indiana, where it's done, there's some real lessons to be learned there.
Yeah, very much so. Karen, so Burlington, not the biggest city in Wisconsin, right? But a darn thriving place. From your perspective, I mean, entrepreneurs can be found anywhere, right? And that's why this approach may help in all areas of the state. What's your experience around that?
Absolutely. And I'll say again, from our perspective, we are 3 years into business and we are at that stage of the hiring stage of hiring staff. We don't want to go outside of the state of Wisconsin, but more importantly, being in some of the community of entrepreneurship, there is some extremely wonderful businesses all across the state. We just talked with a gal last night from Stevens Point that has a business that's incredible business that's coming up. There's talent all across the state, and the last thing we want to do is be drawn out of the state of Wisconsin by some other investor that tells us, we'll invest in you, we like what you're doing, but you have to move your company. And I think Mike talked about the tax base. I think that's an important aspect. We want to stay, we're willing to stay, but we also need that community support of something like the Fund of Funds to get us there. And not just myself, but many of the entrepreneurs need that extra added support, that extra, benefits to take them to that next level of bringing on staff, of hiring staff, of expanding, of growing. The opportunities are out there. Wisconsin's got amazing talent. And the last thing you want to do is see that talent leave or be pulled away because they have, some opportunities in other states that draw them out. The dedication is here. The great work ethic is here. We really want to keep it here and grow it here. There'd be no reason not to.
No reason not to. Let me get back to Representative Kublet for a second, because you raised an important point about where does the money come from on something like this. And as I noted at the outset, and I think Sam reinforced, it would be metered out. I mean, over time. I mean, it's not like $100 million just goes straight into it. I mean, it's on the draws and everything else. But I suspect there that you're saying that within a $91 billion all funds budget, which is the size of the governor's budget, and by all funds, I mean federal, state, etc. Are you suggesting that maybe federal funds that have come through could be used for this?
Wow, you're putting me on a spot there, Tom.
Okay.
So
It just occurred to me as you brought it up.
Yeah. So hypothetically, let's say the state coffers receive an extra $3 billion. I mean, they become part of the state treasury. I mean, if you're looking at one-time investment, wouldn't those be real good dollars spent? I mean, because that's going to be the hardest thing to do, is this either has to get scaled down, or if we want to stay at that 100 million, newfound money is a way to get it done. I mean, I always look at what's the path of least resistance, right? And I know when you're trying to get things in a budget that's $3 or $4 million, it's a challenge. When you're looking at 100 million, now when you have the opportunity of one-time dollars, and this is a one-time investment, sometimes you just, I mean, the fact is it's going to be in the state treasury. So, I mean, I'm just looking at ways to get over the goal line. And I think that would be a way to get over the goal line.
That's interesting. Interesting concept. Sam, do you have any thoughts on that?
I guess for Representative Kublet and everyone else, we have been trying to be as creative as we can be and thinking about, and we dealt with this last year, right? With the CRF dollars, the coronavirus dollars that came through. The guidance in the bill, the American Rescue Act that was signed, and it's really being clarified now by Treasury. The initial guidance in the bill that was signed limited the eligible uses of the dollars coming to state and local governments for pandemic response. And so, I'm just reading the language from the bill, the assistance to households, small business and nonprofits that are related to pandemic response. And so certainly we want to have our ideas open, how to fund something like this. But we, is this are we trying to create this in response to the pandemic? Or has this been an idea that the Tech Council has been really pursuing and making a case for since 2012?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay. Well, good. Well, I mean, it's one of those conversation points, right? I mean,
yep, absolutely.
And by the way, I take it, I mean, when Representative Kublet suggested you and others sit down, I mean, I'm sure you're totally open to that. And
absolutely.
I mean, that's what it's all about. Say, we got one question in. It's kind of about the fund setup as envisioned. As we noted, let's say that there's 100 million from the state, there's a match from the private side, and then no more than 25 million in state dollars could go into any one fund, which of course would have to be matched, same level. And the question is, then how does that basically work? Is there an overall fund of funds manager with the recipient funds, and how much independence do you see the recipient funds having? I suspect you see a lot of independence there. So why don't you spend a little time on that, if you would, Sam?
Yeah, I think the idea behind a fund of funds is to leverage the power of the private market to make decisions. So the last thing you want once dollars are invested into a fund is to have a tremendous, you'll have rules that set up those things, matches and things like that. But the last thing we want to be involved in are individual investment decision by recipient funds. And so I just don't think that's a very effective way the private sector works. Mm-hmm. And so we certainly would have, and the idea is to figure out the best way to build that oversight board and to make those investments through that fund of funds. But once those funds are invested, gosh, I really hope that the state is not at the table when folks are making investment decisions.
Right. From then on, it's kind of a hands off, and the fund managers do what they do best, which is manage funds. So a question that came in, this is from Nick Myers, who's a great young entrepreneur. An issue we face as a young startup is having access to quality software development talent. However, in order to do that locally requires a lot of working capital. I know many startup founders who often look offshore, go elsewhere. So I think you can get the gist of this, but everyone would like to hire it here if they could. Anybody on that? Karen, I mean, I know you're always looking for talent. Jason, I mean, yeah, why don't you all weigh in on this as you can?
Just from past experience, don't go offshore. Cheaper isn't always better. We've actually had the same problem with tech talent. Just what the entrepreneur said, that there's tech talent that's overseas that offers a great rate, but there's a lot of thought that has to go into making that decision. The time zone different, there's just a lot that goes into that decision. Clearly, we would rather have local talent and again, in-house talent on the tech world. And I know that's growing here in Wisconsin, and thank God for that, because we need it more and more as software developers come into the state. I think it's the same process. There's a reason people want to be here, and I think the capital funds to keep them here is going to be important going forward, and more importantly, even the capital funds to draw them here, because we have a big need for tech talent and big need for software tech developers here in Wisconsin. I know that personally, and also in talking with a lot of other entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So you see efforts like this as helping to draw more talent and keep it here.
Absolutely. One of the reasons our business in particular has been pulled and inquired about into the coasts is because of the tech, literally the software development and the technology that we have, and wanting to pull us over into the West Coast. We'd like to stay here, but the tech talent is there's a lot of talent out in the California area.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom, one of the things I wanted to point out, and I think this sort of addresses somewhat of my brother Nick's question. Hey, Nick, when we're designing this, we need to make sure there's balance, meaning you can't have a fund where it's so regulated, where it's so restricted. And one of the reasons why I think we have to have balance with experienced fund managers and new managers is because new managers tend to be hungry. And so they're searching for deal flow and they're searching for ways to make it happen. Whereas sometimes with a more experienced manager, you may not get that kind of flexibility. That's my advocacy for new managers. But in the development of this fund, we need to make sure that it's not so restricted that we pigeonhole both experienced and new fund managers by just saying you can only invest in Madison. We need to make sure we're very leery of those kinds of things with this fund, because you may be hampering money managers and investors' attitude.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and there's a little bit of a conversation going on through our chat right now, kind of along those lines. I mean, do we choose verticals, or do we just let the funds kind of go where those opportunities are? I mean, I think it's going to be more the latter. I mean, that's what investors do. They're really good at figuring out where those opportunities are, as opposed to, trying to set up a set of things that the state shall invest here and not there, kind of. And Jason, I see you nodding because you've seen that in the past, and Mike, you've seen it too. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, we want to be identified as a certain brand, and I think there's a brand of quality of life, a brand of all kinds of different pieces, but yeah, go ahead. Mike, what are your thoughts first?
Well, I think Sam mentioned sausage making, and unfortunately that's part of the sausage making. When you have 3 legislators, the Assembly and the Senate, you've got different walks of life. And when I mean different, it's different. So sometimes to get things through, and Tom, we experienced that last time, is unfortunately we had to have some guardrails or it wasn't going to go. Now, I understand the flexibility, need to be nimble and able to act quick, but unfortunately, there may be some constraints, or I'll call them guardrails, but that's just sausage making.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom.
Mike, I trust that you'll get it done, brother.
Tom, can I just quickly respond and really add on to a point that Karen made? I have a bunch of brothers and sisters. I'm on the older side of that. I have a brother now, the youngest of the tribe. He is in his early 30s, and he landed in Denver. And a sister who's early 30s, she landed in San Francisco. And so they were coming out of college and thinking, where am I going to go as millennials? And they went to those places where there was a buzz that is where new opportunities were. And that's where, if you're young, you're going to go. And so we want to keep as many of our homegrown folks here like they were, and build that quality of life. And part of that quality of life is that drawing that magnet of what is happening here. And so we can do a lot of marketing and advertising and try to draw folks from other things, because with a marketing campaign, but I don't know a better marketing campaign than to really show that the ecosystem of Wisconsin for young people to start with their dreams and their ideas, and they'll have jobs here that will be jobs that will grow new jobs.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's, one thing is definitely true. You can't throw a baseball around this town without hitting somebody named Rickers, right? So you do have a big family. So here's a question. If the fund of funds is approved, and we're getting close to out of time here, but if it's approved, how do we avoid the perception or reality, the same number of number of private funds being the recipients on this? And, is it a way to, how do you see it being more open as possible in terms of seeing what kind of funds might be able to apply to be recipients? And maybe it's too early to ask because we don't have anything through the legislature yet.
Yeah, I'll take a quick stab at that, knowing that, to use that word that's been thrown, there's some sausage making that'll happen.
Right.
Representative Kublet talked about guardrails, that there's a diverse slate of representatives and senators that will weigh in on this. But certainly by limiting by putting a ceiling on the total number of funds that could go out to recipient fund, that does it. It also, we don't want to make the floor too high either, right? And so you want to keep it, if there are some really big or experienced funds that are really able to move the needle in Wisconsin, that's great. If there are smaller funds, we wouldn't want to create a floor, in my opinion, that's too low, that excludes folks either.
Yeah, very good. Again, only a couple minutes left, but I'd love to close with, 30 seconds from each of our four panelists about, why you think this is important and what do you think is the biggest challenge facing us as we move ahead in this process. So Karen, let me start with you. Why is it important?
So local support is what has grown our business. Local support is what I hear in the entrepreneur world and the community that will grow their business. We want to stay here. We don't want to be drawn away. I hear that from others also in Wisconsin. I think a fund like this can keep us here and bring other talent that can support our business. We need tech development as well, as the other entrepreneur talked about, and a fund of funds can bring, rather than sending us away, bring that talent here where we need it to grow our businesses. And then ultimately hire staff and hire additional employees to grow Wisconsin as well.
Good. Jason, 30 seconds from you.
I think it's important for all the reasons Sam and Karen and even Mike talked about, and even you, Tom, and the council pushes the innovation, the attraction, making us attractive to keep people, to keep talent, and then attract talent. What would make it difficult? I think Mike hits it on the head coming from this. You got a lot of legislators and trying to get it through. There are a lot of people who, when they look at it, will start chiming in. And so trying to get that perfect bill is very tough.
Yeah, very good. Sam.
Yeah, I'll just echo, first of all, on why it's so important. Karen and Jason said it, and I said it before, it is keeping those businesses here that we're starting here. All of the ideas when they're looking to grow, that they grow here in Wisconsin, and with that growth will be the growth of jobs. It will be the growth of our tax base. This has been really valuable, having these other panelists, and particularly Representative Kublet on the line. One of the, I think, benefits of the governor's proposal was having not too many details at this point included in it. And the reason why is because if the governor comes in too married to detail X or Y and doesn't come in married to this general idea and how we're going to get it done, then I don't think it would be successful. By walking in, well, really, how do we get this done? What are the guardrails, if necessary, to put on it to satisfy all the different interests and working together? So I think it's something we can do.
Yeah, that's good. Chairman Kublet, last word here, and then I'll close with some coming event.
Well, I guess I just want to say thanks, Tom, for putting this panel together. I think Jason may have said it, that this is the beginning, and I think it's going to be the start of many conversations. And Karen, I want to thank you for taking that leap of faith and being an entrepreneur and starting a new company and being a Harley rider. I've got a fat boy that I ride. I love it. But you know what? We did it once. I think we can do it again. But you know, if anybody thinks it's going to happen overnight, I don't want to fool anyone. It's going to take some time, but at least we have kind of a roadmap of how to get it done. And, you know, I think, though, that we can't forget about the Badger Fund of Funds. It's been successful. So
Oh, yeah.
we need to work together to come up with a solution for everyone.
Excellent. Well, thanks to all of our panelists. Let me close with a couple of things that are happening. Looking ahead, we have a webinar April 1st with Chancellor Blank, Chancellor Mark Money from UW-Milwaukee, and Scott Button of Venture Investors, who's going to talk a little bit about their track record around investing on campus-based R&D and why that's important to the economy. With WIS Business, we're partnering with a webinar on April 27th on U.S. trade with China, and our Entrepreneurs Conference will be coming up. That's going to be June 3rd with our live Diligent Dozen pitches in the business plan contest on June 2nd. So thanks again to a great panel today. Thanks for everyone who was able to take part. And by the way, this will be repeated on Wisconsin Eye, which also filmed this today, as well as the recording we'll make available to our members who are part of things. So again, if you're interested in this, kind of touch base with your legislators. You can go to the legislature's website and find addresses and connection points for all of them. They're very open, and I know from experience they all appreciate having that kind of public contact and input from people. So, all right, thanks again, and we'll see you all soon. Bye, panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, bye-bye.